"They're beating my mama," little girl said to the Mafia boss, crying. What he did next left. The city of Ravenshade was a place of shadows, a labyrinth of narrow streets and towering buildings that seemed to close in around the people living there. It was the kind of place where the light struggled to break through the dark clouds that always hung overhead, and where people whispered about things that should never be spoken aloud. The streets were ruled by men like Leonardo Moretti, a man whose name was feared by all. He was a Mafia boss, and to those in his world his word was law. But on this particular night something happened that would change everything for him. It was late, the kind of late where the city was silent except for the sounds of the distant echoing footsteps of those brave, or foolish, enough to walk the streets at night. Leonardo had just finished a business meeting with his most trusted men. He was making his way home when the sudden cry of a child echoed in the alleyway. It was a sound that immediately caught his attention. A small voice, filled with fear and desperation. "Help! Help! Please! They're beating my mama!" The words pierced through the night. Leonardo's steps faltered, his eyes narrowed, and for a moment, he wasn't the Mafia boss who could take down any man who stood against him. He was just a man, hearing the cry of a child. He hesitated, but only for a moment. Without thinking, he motioned to his men to stay behind and walked towards the alley. His heavy boots echoed on the cold cobblestones. As he rounded the corner, his eyes fell upon a young girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. Her face was streaked with tears, and she was trembling as she watched 2 men, rough and cruel-looking, hold her mother down. Her mother, Maria, was struggling beneath the men, her hands tied behind her back. Her face was bruised, but there was a fire in her eyes, an unwillingness to submit. She fought with everything she had, but it was clear that the men had the upper hand. Leonardo didn't hesitate. With a cold, commanding voice, he shouted, "Get away from them!" The 2 men looked up, momentarily stunned by the appearance of the Mafia boss. But their shock was short-lived. They laughed, recognizing him. One of the men sneered. "Moretti," he said with a mocking tone, "you think you can just walk in here and stop us?" Leonardo's expression didn't change. His voice was calm, almost bored, as he gave his command. "You'll leave her alone." Now, for a brief second the men hesitated, but only for a brief second. They had worked for too many years in the criminal underworld to be intimidated by a man like Leonardo. They stood their ground, and the larger of the 2 made a move toward him. But before he could reach Leonardo, the man was knocked to the ground, his breath knocked out of him. The smaller man turned, trying to flee, but Leonardo's men appeared, cutting off his escape. The larger man was still struggling to get up when Leonardo knelt beside him, his face inches from his. "You don't know what happens when you touch someone under my protection." His voice was low, dangerous. "I don't care who you are or what you think you can do, but I will never let you hurt someone innocent." The man, now thoroughly intimidated, scrambled to his feet and rushed off, dragging the smaller man with him. Leonardo watched them leave with a steely gaze, then turned to the little girl, who was still standing frozen in the middle of the alley. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else there too, something that caught his attention. She wasn't just scared, she was looking at him like he was her only hope. Leonardo straightened and approached the girl slowly, his footsteps softer now. He didn't want to scare her. "Hey," he said gently, "you're safe now. No one's gonna hurt you." The little girl didn't answer right away. She simply stared at him with wide eyes, still trembling, but she didn't pull away. She clutched her mother's bloody hand, who was now struggling to sit up, her face full of concern for her daughter. The girl's voice trembled as she spoke, her words barely above a whisper.
"Why did they hurt her?"
What did she do wrong? Leonardo's heart tightened, though he couldn't explain why. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to feeling anything for people outside of his business dealings, but something about the way this child looked at him, so vulnerable and trusting, made his chest ache. "She didn't do anything wrong," he said softly. "Some people are just evil. They hurt others to feel powerful, but they won't hurt you again. I promise." The girl blinked, and for a moment it seemed like she might say something more. But instead, she just wrapped her tiny arms around her mother, holding on tightly, as though she needed to make sure her mother was real, that she was still there. Leonardo watched them for a moment, his thoughts swirling. He hadn't planned on becoming involved in this situation. He had so many enemies, so many things to worry about. But somehow this girl and her mother had managed to find a way into his heart. Maria, her face battered but still strong, finally managed to sit up. She looked at Leonardo, eyes narrowed. There was no gratitude in her gaze, only suspicion. "Why did you help us?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Leonardo didn't respond immediately. He didn't know how to explain it. It wasn't as if he had a sudden desire to be a hero. He wasn't trying to make himself feel better. He just couldn't stand seeing someone so innocent in pain. And that little girl's tears had affected him in a way he hadn't expected. "You don't owe me anything," he said, after a long silence. "But if you need protection, I can offer it. No one will harm you while I'm here."
Maria seemed to weigh his words carefully.
She wasn't stupid. She knew who Leonardo was and what he was capable of. But there was something in his eyes, something that made her feel like he wasn't just a man of violence and power. She had no idea why he was offering help, but she didn't have the luxury of refusing it. For her daughter's sake, she would accept. "We don't need your protection," Maria said with a quiet firmness. "But I'll take you up on your offer. For now." Leonardo nodded, though he could see the doubt in her eyes. He didn't blame her. He was a dangerous man. He didn't expect her to trust him. But he would prove himself to her, for the sake of the little girl who had looked at him as if he were her only savior. The night air grew colder as Leonardo turned to leave, motioning for his men to follow. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter would change the course of his life. The days that followed the incident in the alley felt strange to Leonardo. It wasn't just the usual chaos that came with running his empire, nor was it the endless meetings with people who feared him. It was something deeper, something he couldn't quite explain. Since the moment he had intervened, saving Maria and Isabella, something had shifted inside him. He had always been the cold, calculating Mafia boss, stoic, unbothered by the suffering around him. But in those moments after he had saved them, a knot had formed in his chest. Isabella's tear-filled eyes, the desperate way she clung to her mother, it haunted him. And then there was Maria, her strength and resilience and the way she looked at him like a warrior facing a threat, not a victim. She didn't trust him, but there was something about her that drew him in. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he knew that he couldn't just walk away from this. Days turned into weeks. The mansion, which was usually a place of cold luxury and endless meetings, became a shelter for Maria and Isabella. It was a place of safety, but even in safety, tension remained. Maria was still wary, still doubtful about why he had chosen to protect them. She was cautious about trusting anyone, especially someone like Leonardo Moretti. But despite her suspicions, she could not deny that Isabella was beginning to flourish in the protection of Leonardo's home. The child who had once been fearful now spent her days running through the vast gardens of the mansion, her laughter echoing through the halls. She had found peace in a place she never expected to, and though Maria didn't show it, she too felt a strange sense of relief. Leonardo had provided them with everything they needed: food, clothes, shelter, but it wasn't charity. He didn't expect gratitude. There was a contract, though unspoken, in the air. He had offered his protection, but at some point he knew that they would owe him. It was how his world worked. Everything had a price. Maria, however, wasn't like the others who had come to him seeking protection. She had no intention of letting herself or Isabella become pawns in his game, no matter how kind he had seemed. She would not become indebted to a man like him. One evening, after dinner, Maria found herself in the sitting room, staring out at the garden. Isabella had already gone to bed, and the mansion was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the city. Maria's thoughts were heavy, and she knew she had to make a decision. She couldn't stay here forever, even if the mansion was a sanctuary. She had to think of her daughter's future. Her thoughts were interrupted when a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Leonardo. "Maria," he said, his voice as calm as ever. "Can we talk?" She turned to face him, her expression guarded. "What about?" About the protection I've offered you, he said, stepping into the room. I've kept my word, but I'm not the kind of man who offers favors without expecting something in return. Maria's heart skipped a beat. She had known this conversation would come eventually. She stood up, crossing her arms defensively. What do you want from us? Leonardo didn't flinch. His eyes, dark and unreadable, locked onto hers. I want a contract. An agreement that you and Isabella will stay under my protection, and in return, you'll owe me a favor when the time comes. There will be no more running, no more hiding. You'll be a part of my world. Maria's blood ran cold. The Mafia world. She had never wanted to be a part of it. She had tried to protect Isabella from that life for years, and now it seemed like she was trapped. You can't expect me to agree to that, Maria said, her voice firm. You saved us, yes. But that doesn't mean I owe you my life or Isabella's. We're not pawns in your game. Leonardo took a step closer, his presence filling the room. I'm not asking for your loyalty, Maria. I'm offering safety. You can leave at any time if you feel that the price is too high. But you know as well as I do that out there, in the world beyond these walls, there's danger. Real danger. You saw it yourself. And it's not just any danger. The people who hurt you will come back. They'll keep coming back until you're destroyed. Unless you accept my protection. That's the price. Maria looked at him, the weight of his words pressing down on her. It was true. The world beyond the mansion's walls was dangerous, filled with people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Her only choice was to stay for Isabella's sake. But agreeing to a deal with a man like Leonardo felt like selling her soul. She let out a sigh, running her hand through her hair in frustration.
I don't trust you, Leonardo. I never will.
But I have no other choice. For Isabella's sake, I'll agree to your terms. But don't think for a second that I'll ever be loyal to you. Leonardo's eyes softened, just for a moment, before the mask of coldness returned. Loyalty is earned, Maria, not given. But you don't have to worry about that. I'll keep my word, and I expect the same from you. The tension in the room was palpable, but there was a strange sense of resolution that settled between them. Maria had made her choice, and Leonardo had made his. As he turned to leave, Leonardo paused at the door. And one more thing, Maria, he said, his voice quieter. Isabella, she's not like the others. She's special. I see it in her eyes. You protect her.
I'll protect both of you. That's the only promise I'll make.
Maria didn't respond. She simply nodded, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She didn't know what to think anymore. All she knew was that she had to keep her daughter safe, and that meant agreeing to things she never would have imagined. But as much as she tried to push it away, she felt a strange pull toward Leonardo, a connection she couldn't ignore. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion became more than just a place of refuge for Maria and Isabella. It began to feel like a home, a strange, unexpected home. The dark corridors, the cold marble floors, the polished wood of the grand dining table, they all seemed less imposing now, less like the home of a man whose life was built on power and fear. It was still a mansion filled with wealth and luxury, but now it was also a sanctuary, a place where Maria could protect Isabella, and for the first time in a long while breathe without the constant fear of danger. Leonardo, however, never seemed to change. He was the same stoic, distant man he had always been, hiding his emotions behind the cold mask he had worn for years. He was the Mafia boss, feared by all, respected by many. He made sure that no one dared to harm Maria and Isabella, and he kept his promises. But despite his protection, there was something about his presence that made Maria uneasy. He was a man of power, a man whose kindness, if you could call it that, always seemed to come with a price. As the days passed, Maria began to notice something subtle, something that had started to change in the way Leonardo looked at her. It wasn't obvious at first, but she could see it in the way his eyes lingered on her a little longer than they should. She couldn't explain it, but she felt the shift. She had always been cautious around him, wary of the man who had saved them. But there was a softening in his gaze, an unspoken understanding that grew between them. He was not just the man who offered protection, he was someone who seemed to want more, though he never said it. Isabella, too, was different. The child who had once cried for help now played in the gardens of the mansion with a sense of freedom she had never known. She laughed and sang as she ran through the sprawling grounds, her joy infectious. Maria found herself watching her daughter with a sense of relief, a hope that, maybe, they had found a place where they could be safe, at least for now. But deep down, Maria knew that safety came with strings attached, and she couldn't shake the feeling that, one day, she would have to pay for it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the last light of the day painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Maria found herself alone in the garden. She hadn't meant to escape the mansion's walls, but somehow she needed to be away from the quiet tension that hung in the air whenever Leonardo was near. She didn't know what was happening to her, how her heart seemed to skip a beat whenever he walked into her room, how she had started to see him not as the Mafia boss but as a man who was, perhaps, capable of more than she had originally thought. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was that she wasn't sure she could trust him. Even after everything he had done for them, Maria could not ignore the fact that he was a man of danger, a man whose world was filled with lies and deceit. And though he had shown kindness, she could not forget what he was capable of. As she walked along the garden path, lost in thought, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Leonardo standing there, his hands in his pockets, his gaze unreadable.
"You're out here alone," he said, his voice smooth as always, though there was something softer in it that evening.
"Shouldn't you be inside?" Maria frowned but didn't answer right away. Instead, she took another step down the path, her feet brushing against the grass. She didn't want to invite him in, didn't want to acknowledge the strange pull between them, but she couldn't ignore it either. "I needed some air," she finally said. "Things have been too quiet lately." Leonardo took a step closer, his eyes searching her face. "Too quiet?" he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You think something's coming? Or are you just not used to peace?" Maria didn't respond. Instead, she stared ahead, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure if she wanted to tell him what was really bothering her. She didn't want to admit that, despite everything, she had started to feel something for him. A connection, a bond that she didn't understand, and it terrified her. Leonardo seemed to sense her unease. He stepped forward, stopping just a few feet away from her. "Maria," he said softly, his voice surprisingly tender, "I know this isn't easy for you. I can't imagine what you've been through, but I'm not here to hurt you or Isabella. I'm here to protect you." Maria's breath caught in her throat. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time, she saw the weariness in his eyes. The years of pain, of loss, of living a life built on violence and fear. It was as if a wall had cracked, just enough for her to see the man beneath the mask. "I'm not asking for your trust, Maria," he continued, his voice low and sincere, "but I will never let anything happen to you or your daughter. I've made my choices, and I'm offering you a chance to make yours. Stay with me, and I'll give you more than protection."
I'll give you the freedom to live without fear.
Maria felt a knot tighten in her chest. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the raw emotion that he rarely allowed anyone to see. And for a moment she found herself wishing that she could believe him, that she could trust him enough to let her guard down. But she couldn't. Not yet. "I don't know if I can trust you," Maria whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can trust anyone ever again." Leonardo's face hardened slightly, but there was no anger in his expression, just understanding. "I can't undo the past, Maria. I can't erase the things that have happened to you. But I can offer you a future where you don't have to look over your shoulder every time you leave this place. A future where Isabella can grow up without fear."
Maria's heart ached at his words.
She wanted so desperately to believe him, to feel that peace he was offering. But trust wasn't something that came easily for her anymore. She had spent too many years running from the past, hiding from the truth, and now she was faced with a decision she didn't know how to make. For a long moment they stood there in silence. the air thick with unspoken words. Then, finally, Maria looked up at him, her eyes meeting his. "Then, show me," she said softly. "Show me that I can trust you. Show me that you're not just a man of words." Leonardo's expression softened, and for the briefest of moments, he allowed himself a small smile. A rare, genuine smile. "I will, Maria. I'll prove it to you." Maria's heart skipped a beat as Isabella's trembling voice echoed in her mind. "They've found us." The words seemed to cut through the peaceful silence of the mansion like a dagger. The calm, safe bubble that had surrounded them for weeks felt like it was about to burst. She rushed to Isabella's side, her mind racing. "What do you mean?" Maria whispered urgently, pulling her daughter close. "Who's found us?" Isabella looked up at her mother, her eyes wide with fear. "The men from before, they've come back." Maria's breath caught in her throat. She didn't need to ask any more questions. She knew exactly who Isabella was talking about. The same men who had hurt her, who had come to tear apart their fragile life. And now, it seemed, they had found a way into Leonardo's world, a place that had once seemed like a safe haven. Maria gripped Isabella's hand tightly, the protective instinct she had honed over the years flaring up within her. But there was no time for fear now. She had to keep her daughter safe. She turned toward the door, ready to move, but stopped when she saw the shadow in the doorway. Leonardo stood in the doorway, his figure silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway. His eyes were sharp, focused, and full of the same resolve that had always made him the formidable man he was. But tonight, something was different. There was no anger in his eyes, just determination. "I've known they'd come," he said, his voice calm and steady. "They always come back, but you're not alone anymore." Maria's eyes narrowed in disbelief. "You knew, and you didn't tell us?" Leonardo's expression softened slightly, but his resolve remained. "I didn't want to worry you. I didn't want you to feel like you're always living in fear. But you're right to be scared. They won't stop until they get what they want." Maria's hand shook, but she steadied herself. "What are we supposed to do now?" "I can't keep running, Leonardo. I can't live like this anymore." Not for Isabella. Leonardo took a step forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "You don't have to run anymore. I've built this life for you and Isabella, and I won't let anyone take it from you." His words, so simple, so firm, held power. Maria felt a surge of something. Hope, maybe, but also fear. She had trusted him before, but this felt different. She had made a deal with a man whose life had been shaped by violence, and now she was caught in the web of that world. Would he truly keep his promise? But then she looked down at Isabella, who was holding her hand tightly. The child she had sworn to protect. Maria knew that for Isabella's sake, she had no choice but to trust him. "Then what do we do?" Maria asked, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. Leonardo's eyes darkened as he looked toward the hallway. "We prepare for them. They think they can just walk into my world and take what they want. But I'll show them that's not how things work. Not anymore." Maria nodded, her heart heavy. She had never wanted this life, never wanted to be a part of this world. But now, with nowhere else to turn, she found herself relying on the very man she had once feared. Leonardo motioned for Maria and Isabella to follow him. "Stay close," he said. "I won't let them hurt you." The three of them made their way through the grand halls of the mansion, moving toward the hidden passageways Leonardo had made sure no one could find. As they reached the old library, Leonardo stopped, turning to Maria. "You need to stay hidden, both of you," he said, his voice low and urgent. "This isn't going to be easy, but I'll protect you. Don't come out unless I say so." Maria hesitated. "You're going to fight them, aren't you?" Leonardo's gaze softened, but his determination didn't waver. "I have to. This is the only way to end it. I won't let them come near you again." Maria nodded, though her heart twisted at the thought of him facing those men alone. She didn't want him to risk his life for them, but she knew it was already too late for that. He had chosen this fight, chosen to protect them, and she would stand by him. Leonardo kissed Isabella's forehead and gave Maria a long, steady look. "Trust me," he said. "Stay here, and you'll be safe." As he turned and left the room, Maria couldn't help but wonder what would happen when the dust settled. Would they still be safe? Or would this fight bring everything crashing down? The hours that followed were filled with tense silence. Maria and Isabella stayed hidden in the library, their only company the sound of their own breathing. Maria held her daughter close, trying to reassure herself that they were doing the right thing by trusting Leonardo. But it was hard to ignore the feeling in her chest, the feeling that the storm was just beginning. Finally, the silence was broken by the sounds of shouting, the clash of voices rising in the distance. Maria held Isabella tighter, her heart racing as she realized the time had come. Leonardo was facing them, his enemies, his past. Suddenly, the door to the library creaked open. Maria jumped, but it was only Leonardo who stood there, his face grim but resolute. "They're gone," he said simply. "It's over." Maria's breath caught in her throat. "You did it?" Leonardo nodded. "I told you I would. I've made sure they won't come back." Not for a long time, anyway. But as he stepped into the room, Maria could see the toll the fight had taken on him. His clothes were torn, his face marked with the signs of battle, but his eyes were calm. There was no anger in him now, just a sense of finality. Maria's heart ached as she looked at him, seeing the man he had become, the man he had chosen to be for them. Isabella, who had been quiet for so long, stepped forward. "Are we safe now?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. Leonardo knelt down in front of her, brushing a lock of hair from her face.
"You're safe, sweetheart," he said softly.
"No one will hurt you anymore. You and your mother are free now." Isabella's face lit up with relief, and for the first time in weeks, Maria felt the weight of her own fear begin to lift. She watched as Leonardo stood up, meeting her eyes. He had kept his word. He had protected them, and in doing so he had shown her something she hadn't seen before. A man capable of redemption. A man capable of love. And as they stood there together, Maria realized that for all the pain and darkness that had brought them to this point, there was still hope. They could rebuild. They could find a future where they weren't living in fear, a future where love and trust could bloom despite the scars of their past. Leonardo took Maria's hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. "We have a future, Maria, together."